Covalizer. This is an empty container of what comes in the kit. It says conditioning fluid, HAFC conditioning fluid on it. That is one of the three components that constitute the Covalizer. Acetone is supplied by you, the installer, or the customer. Take your pick. It is not included in the kit. You can get acetone from beauty supply stores. You can pick it up at hardware stores, and it'll be in a container just like this, except it'll say acetone on it. That is the second component in the Covalizer. The third component, you have a choice. You can either use xylene or toluene. Xylene and toluene and acetone can all be found in the paint supply houses because all of them are like paint thinners, brush cleaners. I use acetone. I do ported exhaust manifolds for, I'm a supplier for a retail company. So I take stock exhaust manifolds, I go in there and I port them, and then I do some resurfacing, and then I sandblast them and I put this high temp titanium coating on them. And I use an airbrush. Acetone cleans all that crap out of my airbrush so I can keep using it again and again. So it's just a paint thinner. 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. Conditioning fluid comes in the kit. The acetone and the xylene or toluene will be purchased separately. This comes in the kit. So you can fill this up, and then you take and you loosen this lid. With this one tight, you squeeze it, and it's going to force the liquid up this side tube and into this separate little reservoir here. This separate reservoir has milliliter markings on the one side and ounce markings on the other side. So how much do you use? Three to 5 ounces per 10 gallons, or see how quickly I can find this. $67 to 112 milliliters per 30 liters would be the metric equivalent. So, what does the Covalizer do? Good question. I'm glad you asked. Let's look at them one at a time. The conditioning fluid. The conditioning fluid contains a cleaner. The cleaner is going to clean out the injectors, the fuel rail, the fuel tank, the back sides of the valves, the combustion chamber, the tops of the pistons. A cleaner. Incidentally, if you have a fairly late model car, there's not going to be a whole lot to clean. If you have an old vehicle with lots of miles, you're probably going to clog up the fuel filter. So you put the Covalizer in the fuel tank, you run a tank or two, and then you put another fuel filter on it to get rid of all the crap. cleaner. It also contains lubricators. Acetone has no lubrication in it. Xylene, toluene has no lubrication in it. Your fuel pump is lubricated by the fuel. So by adding xylene and acetone to your fuel, you're stripping it of that which lubricates the fuel pump. So there's a lot of guys, me included, that have experimented with acetone and burned up fuel pumps because it stripped the lubricity out of the fuel. So the conditioning fluid puts that lubricity back into the fuel that was stripped out by the acetone and the xylene. So we aren't replacing fuel pumps unneeded. In fact, there's a little bit more in there than what we're taking out so that we will help fuel pumps and fuel injectors to last practically indefinitely. Cleaner, lubricator. All right, here's where I'm going to show you just how little I really know about chemistry. There's also an accelerator in the conditioning fluid. I cannot explain this, but I've been told the accelerator works with the acetone and the xylene, the toluene, and it also works with the gasoline to, and I'm putting my own words into the description given to me, accentuate that OH radical process. So the accelerator speeds up the burn. Any questions on this?
So we gotta use it with every gas tank?
Mm-hmm. Every time you fill up, top it off. The acetone, first of all, reduces the surface tension of the fuel chemically. We're going to use the magnets to reduce the surface tension of the fuel through a magnetic field. The acetone is going to further that process chemically. Because of the reduced surface tension, it will help vaporize the fuel better. Any questions on acetone? Xylene toluene, first of all, acts as an octane improver. A lot of guys with turbo cars, race cars, high compression, whatever, will go and buy 93 octane pump gas and then dump xylene or toluene in there, and it runs like 102 octane fuel if they get enough in there. So it's an octane improver in that it retards the detonation tendencies of an engine. It's also a combustion process improver. I'd say over half of us are old enough to remember tetraethyl leaded fuel. The tetraethyl lead acted as an octane improver by attracting the free radicals in the combustion process back in the back corners of the combustion chamber. So this is a little tricky to follow. Free radicals are our friend when they are being consumed by the flame front. Free radicals in the back corners of the combustion chamber over in the intake valve pockets are our worst nightmare because they will prompt detonation. If the free radicals are not contributing to a flame front, they're contributing to a detonation process. So tetraethyl lead would go in there and actually it would get consumed in the combustion process, so it did not retard the combustion process. But when it was as part of the fuel, whether it was in an atomized aerosol or clinging to the vapor hydrocarbons in the fuel, It would absorb those free radicals to keep the fuel from going into auto ignition. Detonation is auto ignition, mostly. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts and split hairs with you, but the xylene and toluene vaporizes readily, has a low vapor point, so it's not going to stay a liquid. It's going to go into the combustion chamber. On the compression stroke, it's going to readily vaporize. But it's going to suck up all those free radicals and stabilize them until the flame front can get to them. It acts as an octane improver. It reduces detonation. Plus, it also helps the acetone and the xylene toluene also help to keep the valves clean, the pistons clean, the ring lands clean. So all three components act as cleaners. I mean, they're all, chemical paint thinners. So they'll keep things clean inside, which also reduces detonation tendencies. Any questions on this?
Let me ask you one question.
All right, let me see if I can answer.
I have used a fuel additive that I can go back to regular gasoline instead of the 93 octane gasoline. Will these things do where you can go back to regular gas instead of the high octane gas?
The
I'm telling you
HAFC
that I
kit.
didn't have any problems with it.
The HAFC kit, where the Covalizer is a part of the kit, you should be able to take a car that liked 91 octane fuel and run it on 87. The 93 octane, if that was your threshold, you should be able to get away with 89. Okay. If you run it for a couple of weeks, you might find that car that loved the 93 will now run on 87 after everything gets cleaned out well. The fuel cell is going to improve the combustion process to where the octane fuel requirements are going to be lowered. The Covalizer will lower the octane fuel requirements. The fuel heater, believe it or not, will lower the octane fuel requirements. Yes, sir.
What will fail after mixing it? What's the shelf life after you mix the three?
It's not like gas where it's going to, as long as you have it in a sealed container, if you have it in an open container, the acetone is going to evaporate off. It's got a very low vapor point, and your three-way mix will be skewed. But as long as it's in a sealed container, it should be good for 10 years or so. Any other questions?
So you put them separately, you gotta have separate?
Well, you mix it, and then you pour it into this.
Oh, okay.
And then this you keep in the vehicle.
Okay.
So you get to the gas station,
this
And there's
is
a funnel that
1/3,
comes with
1/3,
this.
1/3. Okay.
and there's a funnel that comes in the kit. Let me see if I can put, yeah, here we go. So then you can take this funnel, shove it down into the fuel tank, and pour it in like that,
The
and
little
not
flapper,
spill it
push the
all
little
over.
flapper.
Yeah. Any other questions?
When you run out of the conditioner fluid, that has to be ordered?
See your dealer. It is purchasable separately, yes. Yes, sir.
Comment, you get a second one of those bottles and pre-measure what you want to put in, and when I get down to quarter tank, fill up, I already have it measured out, just pour it in there, and especially if it's real cold weather. don't want
Options
that
are
bottle.
open. We put together a program that's pretty generic, pretty universal. Individual vehicles, you might want to tweak the system a little bit. Hopefully we'll have taught you enough that you'll be educated enough that you can go in and tweak stuff. And, things like keeping separate containers and whatnot, who's to say you can't, Any other questions? I am surprised. I am really surprised. This is the first class that has not said, I heard that heating the fuel is the wrong thing to do. How's come the race car drivers run them near cool cans? Ain't you gonna get more power if you cool the fuel while you're heating it? Either you guys aren't, paying attention, falling asleep, or you're already that far beyond that you don't need to ask such a silly question. So I don't know if I should congratulate you or slap you around to wake you up. The cool cans were introduced back in the late 50s, early 60s, a long, long time ago. And the reason they were introduced is because back then everything was carbureted. So you went to the racetrack, and you get out there 8:30 in the morning, it's 60-some degrees, and you take it down there 4 or 5 times, you got the jets just perfect, you got everything timing, it's just working great. And then you go and you get some lunch and just kind of BS, check out to wait for the races to start. By the time you actually get out there on the track, now it's like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening. And whereas it was, 60-some degrees that morning, now it's 85 or 90 degrees. And you go out and the car falls flat on its face because you got so much thermal energy in the fuel now, hot engine, hot track, hot ambient temperatures, you're actually boiling the fuel in the float bowl. You got a liquid metering device called a carburetor that does not do a very good job of metering boiling fuel. And so to keep consistent, they would run the fuel through a bucket of ice water, essentially, a cool can. And that way it would stay in a liquid state in the carburetor long enough to be properly metered into the incoming airstream. They got consistent times, and in drag racing, that's what wins, consistency. You can go in there with the 19.8-second car and kick butt on the 9-second cars as long as you're 19.8000 every single time. You don't have to be the fastest, you got to be the most consistent. So the cool cans were a way to keep the cars consistent. Heating the fuel promotes vaporization. Vaporization, that's what burns. Liquid fuel doesn't burn. The more thermal energy you can impart into that fuel, the more of it's going to phase change into a vapor, the more of it's going to burn quicker and make power when we can use it. Any other questions?
What's the efficiency of this mixing cracking the gas?
Vehicle to vehicle, it's going to change because the port shape makes a big difference. Now I'm into the Chrysler 2.2 turbos, and I can make those heads really scream, not just in power but also fuel economy, because I'm able to get a nice swirl going. So as the air-fuel charge comes through the intake valve, it's coming in at the tangent of the cylinder and spinning around, and everything gets like a blender on frappe, and just small block Chevy, on the other hand, the air-fuel charge is coming in. Oh, excuse me, pardon me, got to get around this push rod. Ooh, wow, man, we got a head bolt there, and it's come screeching around the corner and smacks right into the cylinder wall sideways. There's no flow, there's no swirl, it's just and fall. And so what efficiency this has on a nice swirl chamber like the Chrysler 2.2 turbo is going to be probably different than on a small block Chevy that smacks into the side, falls flat on its face, and you got extremely rich pockets here and extremely lean pockets there.
Symmetric compression might have a factor as well.
This will allow higher compression. I mean, if you were going to, from scratch, build up an HAFC engine, first of all, I'd be running a good, efficient design. The 4.6 Ford, awesome design. I hate Ford, but I love that design. This Escort out here, oh man, I'm glad that's got twin ports. If you ain't seen the inside of one of those heads, you don't know what you're missing, baby. That's a good design. But I still hate Fords. But I can appreciate, when they do good stuff. Right. I would build something like that, and I would build it with approximately a 13-to-1 compression ratio, and it would run on 87-octane fuel when I was done. And with combining HAFC with engine technology, I think you could have a mid-sized family car getting at least as good, if not better, than this Mazda is on a regular basis. Oh, yes, I am building one. 1991 Dodge Spirit RT. It's one of 1,206 cars made. It's got a Lotus engine in it. There was fewer than 2,000 cars ever made with that engine in it. It's double overhead cam 16-valve 2.2, turbocharged, intercooled, everything heavy duty as all get out. The fastest production sedan sold in the world in 1991. But I have one of those rare and expensive cylinder heads that's 95% done sitting on the floor. And after I'm done with that, I got to take it up to the machine shop, give them $250 to put the seats and the guides and tank it and all that. I ported the intake manifold, and I ported the exhaust manifold, not just for increased volumetric efficiency, in other words flow, but to enhance the swirl. I I do something called power lines, P-O-W-R-E-L-Y-N-Z, which is screw threads turned into the intake ports. I had a machine shop make up special tools that fit in my die grinder, and I can put a 20 pitch, a 16 pitch, or a 12 pitch screw thread right in the intake ports. What that does is it creates a variable boundary layer so that at low lift or low throttle openings, the port constricts. You still have a high velocity going down the center of that port, and you got a thick boundary layer. And then as the valve lift and throttle angle increase, that boundary layer starts diminishing, keeping the high velocity but allowing more and more and more flow. That rough texture, if you get fuel droplets that fall out of suspension, they hit that rough texture, one droplet will bounce off into 20 or 30 smaller droplets. Sometimes it'll actually stick, radiate outwardly, and then vaporize off into the incoming airstream. Plus there's combustion chamber tricks and stuff that I do. So I'm going to take this Spirit with an HAFC and a few other tricks. I mean, there's in the back of the manual, there's other fuel economy tricks. So my goal is break into the 12s in the quarter and break 100 miles per gallon going cross country with it. Not just, you know, a closed loop, but actually going across country. Because there's a conference out in Salt Lake in March that I'm scheduled to go to. Represent you guys. Secretly, because they ain't going to see it coming. All right. No more questions on the Covalizer? Yes, sir?
People have asked me some questions about the addition of acetone and xylene. They don't understand these as chemicals, and they say, oh, is that something that's going to affect any of the seals, any of the rubbers, or any of the materials in any vehicle?
You can run the car on 100% acetone. Gasoline is cheaper, but you can run a car on 100% acetone. You will burn out the fuel pump, and you will burn up the injectors. But let's take a look at this. 3 to 5 ounces per 10 gallons. Let's go on the high side here once. Let's say 5 ounces per 10 gallons. Well, let's see here. 5 ounces per 10 gallons. How many ounces in a gallon? 128 ounces in a gallon. So 128 ounces times 10 gallons equals 1,280 ounces of fuel, right? All right. So that would be a 5 to 1280 ratio. That would be a 1 to 256 ratio. About 3,900 parts per million of Covalizer. Now, that's of the total Covalizer. Now, 1/3 of that is acetone and 1/3 of that is xylene. So let's take it times 2/3. So let's see here. 3906 times 0.6666666 equals, that's about 2604 parts per million of that stuff. Or put another way, that's yeah, 1/3 xylene and 1/3 acetone, and those are the two, so that's 2/3 is what his guys are saying are crap, bad for stuff. So let's see here, 256 times 3. Okay, that's a 1 to 512 ratio in the gasoline. You're starting to see how insignificant this is.
I realize that, but you're dealing with a lot of people out there that hear something, oh, this is a nasty chemical, or automatically.
My job is to teach you. Your job is to sell them. So
Well, I'm just asking to say.
I'm not coming to your place and talking to your customers. That's your job.
I understand that. I just need to know,
Yeah.
how to answer them and say, well,
This is one approach.
This is where, they use it for this. This is, once you explain to them what, you know, your acetone does and your xylene does, along with conditioner.
In reality, this is the high end, and most cars will like about 3 to 3.5 ounces per 10 gallons. This is too much for most vehicles, so whatever these numbers are, reduce them. So we're talking a very, very, very minuscule amount of the acetone and the xylene for starters, and then we're going to offset their lack of appropriate behavior with this. Any other questions?
I have a question. Can you just explain to me what we get 1/3 of what? Like we just mix that here, the 1/3 of ounce?
Yeah, all right. So what do I mean by that? All right. Take a container like that. This. Not styrofoam because this will all dissolve it. But just, you know, for illustration, fill it up and pour it into a container. Fill it up,
Same amount.
pour it into the same container.
Same amount.
Same amount. Fill it up, pour it into the same container. Then take that container and shake it up good. Now you have equal parts of all three chemicals.
Okay.
One part, one part, one part.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.